Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Wicked Cool Kids podcast. In this series, we will be interviewing some of the community's dungeon masters, also known as game masters. Today, Jason is joining me, and I am really excited to get a little insight into the inner workings of his evil genius DM brain. So without further ado, let's get into it. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jason.
No problem at all.
Oh, I guess the first question is, most people start out as players, and while that's not always 100% the case, I'm going to go on the grand assumption that that probably was for you. So why, if that is the case, why did you decide to jump behind the screen? And how long had you been playing D&D before you ran your first game?
I was playing D&D for a very short time before I jumped over to the DM side. An old mutual friend of ours, Seb, got me into D&D while I was living in England. We played one session and then the group fell apart, which was a trial session. It was expected. You know what I mean? It was, I play this game. Would you guys like to come over and we can try it out and see how it is? Me and Evelina fell in love with it. There's another couple that were there with us who just, it wasn't their thing. So instantly kind of fell apart. But I had that itch to play and I just couldn't because we didn't have the numbers or didn't have the time or the space wasn't available. So I was like, you know what, I'll run it myself. So I jumped on the DM wagon pretty fast after discovering how much I enjoyed D&D.
I'm really excited to learn that Seb got you into it. So if this makes it to Seb's ears, thank you so much for introducing Jason to the game because, I mean in full circle, right? Because you introduced me to Seb. So great. I love that. So was the first game that you ran then from there a pre-written module, or did you immediately go into something homebrewed?
Yeah, immediately into homebrew. I have way too much desire to control aspects of my worlds, and over time I've broken that down and learned to accept the certain things that come with the territory of creating a world. But my first campaign was set in a very prehistoric fantasy setting where I wouldn't allow the players to play humans, elves, Goliaths, those kind of humanoid races. So humans were the equivalent of our cavemen in this setting.
Oh, okay.
So they had to play stuff like grungs or Githyanki or like lizard folk kind of dealings, UNT. Because I wanted to have that kind of jungle Mandarin vibe to it, where they go around and find like pyramids in the middle of the forest and stuff. Because I just thought that was cool. It's a little bit different to the entry game that Seb ran for us. And it's kind of like, I'm just really interested. It's called something like Svampia, because I was learning Swedish at the time, and Svamp is mushroom. And I thought it's going to be quite murky, it's going to be boggy and stuff. So I'll go with something that it's like, this word interests me. And created the whole like little continent based around it and the little factions and stuff. And then just deep delved into world creation, which got me hooked pretty instantly.
That's really fascinating because although that is 100% new information for me, I don't think I find any of that surprising.
No.
Not including the way you named the campaign, the fact that you were restrictive in terms of what races you had and what races you allowed. That feels very Jason to me. I love every part of it. How long did that campaign last?
It lasted up until we moved to Sweden. So we ran it on a bi-weekly situation for about 2 years. So it was going pretty strong for a long time. And it was Evelina, Seb, and his other half. And it was just a bi-weekly thing. Come round to ours, we can have it all set up. And I was painting miniatures at the time, so every week I'd be like, they're going to fight this boss because I've painted this particular mini. So that was kind of the level of structure.
So
yeah.
Nice.
So each month I used to go to the games shop that sold the miniatures, and he'd have like new versions of different creatures. And I was like, oh, this is a cool one. Let's see which ones of these creatures are around their level. And we would just encounter this creature, because it was the party themselves were based around the kind of a contracted monster hunter variants and stuff, so they could pick up bounties for these monsters. So it made sense that the monster was quite different each week, and it wasn't a linear story like I tend to lean more towards in most recent campaigns.
I really kind of love that idea too, though, because as we've talked about before, and you are very aware of, I think at this point, sometimes decision making is not the easiest for me. So having having the idea to walk into a shop and look at a variety of monsters that are there in front of you and just say, okay, which one looks cool, which one might be the appropriate level, kind of takes out a little bit of that decision making off of the plate for me versus, opening an entire monster manual and saying, okay,
You
well,
can,
let's sort this
yeah, so
entire book out.
you can get overwhelmed real fast. And I still do not have physical copies of the books, and I was only working off
Mhm.
the basic rules for D&D Beyond at the time, back before it even had all the upgrades that it's got now. So there was no like monster encounter builder and all these lists where you could roll digitally. It was I'm finding this on Pinterest or on a
Yeah.
website, and I'll print out the page, and I've still got the folder with the binders of just random monsters that I thought would look cool from Pinterest and other sites.
One day when we make a WCK museum, we can put that in the Jason section.
Yeah,
It's very well curated. So all right, then how long has it, because it sounds like it's been a while. How long have you been DMing for?
I think it must be probably 6 years at this point.
That's a bit.
Yeah, yeah. So the first introduction was 3.5 because that was what Seb ran and what he was comfortable with and what he started playing when he was younger.
Mhm.
Um, and then I was like, oh, this is complex. And I know they've got a later version. So I went into 5e when I started, which
You didn't go into
simplifies the.
4?
No, no, I'm always a sucker for going for the latest version or something. So I went straight to the 5,
Yeah.
which is great because they simplified it so much, and there wasn't all these expansions out at the time either that they have now.
Yep.
So it was like the limitation really helped me narrow my focus on what was achievable with my imagination at that time.
Yeah. I did not know, I don't think, that you started off at 3.5. I have a cousin who I recently learned, well, fairly recently learned, plays D&D, and I'm pretty sure that 3.5 is his sweet spot too. I don't even think that he's really moved on to 5, because he likes 3.5 so much. I've only ever played 5, which is great because the idea of them moving into something else with the talks that have been around really stresses me out because I feel like I barely kind of know what I'm doing now. So to be able to take that and move to a different system is stressful. But it sounds like you had minimal experience with 3.5 before you moved into 5 anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and I was lucky, as I said, that the 5 that I moved into was the core books and maybe 4 or 5 of like Cares of Strahd or like
Yeah.
the other kind of modules that are based around like source material by Wizards, and then over the last 3 years, I think maybe 15 plus books have come out on
So
top of it,
many,
and I'm like,
so
if I
many
if I
books.
started today and looking at all that, I'd be totally overwhelmed. I'd
Yeah.
probably stick to the player side for much longer than I did.
Yeah, I'm thankful that I have tunnel vision as far as that goes, and I don't I see all of those other books, and it is really overwhelming to see how many other modules there are to it. But anyway, so I think we could probably safely assume that you enjoy being the game master. I know it's not always the case with people. Sometimes people fall into the role of forever GM because nobody else steps up to the plate, and you'd rather be the one running and play versus not play at all. But the question still is, do you enjoy being a DM?
Yeah, I'd say I prefer being a DM over a player, and I
What do
don't.
you?
I don't know if it's because I like to have that control over the world, and less control. I like to direct a little bit more than I like to participate.
Mm,
So when I do participate, I tend to take a more directive role as well. With my characters, they're always quite like either opinionated or will drive the story on, just because I'm used to being in that kind of position. Um,
yeah.
and I like entertaining people. I'm just a people pleaser at heart anyway. So to provide the experiences, it makes me happy making other people happy. And if they have a good time in my games, then I'm also having a good time. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, definitely more of a DM leaning D&D player.
That's fantastic. We obviously, as a D&D community, we need people like that. Otherwise, we would never function, right? Because there are far more players than there are people who are willing to run games. So, but I think that probably rings true to you as a person too. Even, you know, the games that I do play with you, be it D&D or even when we play League of Legends, you like to be a support player. It makes sense that you would like to be a DM because you're really kind of orchestrating and supporting all of the players at the same time and trying to incorporate their stories, their backstories, what they're going through presently, their relationships and interactions. You're trying to
Yeah,
support and
yeah.
facilitate all of that.
It's the direct observation of cause and effect as well. Here's the scenario. How does this affect the players? I love that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
let's go. And I try to go like what seems cool, what makes sense. Let's take and scout some of this backstory and put it in there, and then see where it develops. So I'm never more than like 3 sessions in my campaigns planned ahead. I have the start here. The goal is this point, but between that point, I'm only ever like 3 sessions in front of where the players are at. So it's constantly evolving.
3 sessions, I mean, that's really good because obviously, I mean, especially being in your campaigns, I know that sometimes we take it places that we were not anticipating. So
Yeah.
being 3 sessions ahead can sometimes, not even work because we decided to go somewhere completely different. But that actually leads me perfectly into my next question, which is the question that I'm sure you were anticipating, and it's about preparation. Everybody kind of has their own different way to prep for sessions. I know that you specifically love to make maps, which has led to you actually drawing and creating your own assets to put them together into your own maps completely of your own design. Can you walk me through, though, how you prep for a session and how has that changed from the very beginning up until now?
Yeah, so I'll start from the beginning. So as I said, with the miniatures, I'd pick what was the coolest, find the stats, and go the latest today's bounty because it was essentially a series of one shots. That first campaign, today's bounty for this much gold. You have these options. Which one of them do you want to go for? And then, regardless of what the end monster is, I'd plan scenarios. So I always go for like a free encounter scenario for each session, whether that be a puzzle or just an interaction for a player's backstory or something along those lines. Uh, I tend to like throw out the bump into some wolves or some goblins on the way to whatever bounty they pick. So it's very minimalistic at the start. Now, because I've got created this whole world, it becomes a little bit more complex and with more in-depth like characters and backgrounds. It's hard to really plan a session because, as I said, sometimes it can go a complete opposite direction to where you anticipated it was going to go. So I had to get really good at coming up with situations on the spot and react to the players directly rather than trying to anticipate what the players are going. I'm lucky enough to have the free time in the background to plan for almost any scenario within the
Hmm.
world and the parameters that I have built. So I tend not to do in-depth planning. I tend to listen to what the players are talking about in their characters or the situations that are really peaking up for them. And I'll have a bunch of maps, and it's probably overkill most of the time, but it'll be like certain NPCs, or if I feel like it's slowing down a bit, I'll put in an NPC with a problem, and I'll
Hmm.
just have a stockpile of situations to throw at the players rather than you have to be at this point by this time,
Yeah. Yeah.
or have an NPC that says you have to do this and get to this place. Often, especially in our first campaign, when you're supposed to deliver an item and then return back home, 2 days later, you ended up staying in that one particular city for
Yeah.
2 weeks in game instead,
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
point where one of the characters' parents was really worried, and there ended up being things that happened in the background in their city that were going on that were planned for your return.
Yep.
But I was like, well, it would have happened anyway, so I'm just going to do this at this point and see
Yeah.
what happens. And while they're over here, and then because I had that kind of structure planned and NPCs based in this city that was adjacent to where you guys were supposed to be going, I can just go, right, if they want to stay here, then I can just pull this situation that I'd already pre-written, just because it could have been any NPC that came to you with that situation. I just moved the location to where you guys were at. So having that mobility of situation really comes into the planning these days.
That's um that's really interesting and something that I hadn't really thought about. I think probably until until I hit your campaign. Because in the past I have um I think we've probably all played with a DM, whether it's because of inexperience or I'm running from a module and I feel tied to it. There have been times where we've been kind of railroaded as a player, sometimes subtly and sometimes a little more abruptly railroaded into being forced into a direction or not. Um, but you allowing us to have the autonomy of our own decisions, right? But the rest of the world is still happening. You were ideally supposed to be going back to this city. You didn't, but that doesn't put the pause button,
Yeah,
on
on the
that
city.
city.
Yeah.
That city keeps happening and the events keep going whether or not you choose to go back there. And then when you go back there, uh-oh,
Yeah,
now there are
somebody's father's
repercussions.
gone, or I find some way to punish you
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
the decisions you make. That I kind of it helps you guys, I hope, immerse yourselves in the world. It makes the world feel more alive and real, with certain consequences to actions if you do stray from the beaten path, which is fine. Which is like that's why I do these. The scenarios are not tied to any particular location, so
Mhm.
um, I can throw a ghost encounter in the woods or in an urban city,
Yep.
or those kind of things can be moved around, but location specific things I also create just in case stuff happens. For example, we know that the home city in the first campaign was attacked while you guys were away, but also if you guys hadn't have chosen to leave the city walls in the second campaign when the blast happened, you guys would have affected that, or that would have still happened if you had carried the campaign to a different city because you were looking at investigating some other surrounding places. These core events, as I like to refer to them as, would happen regardless of where you are by a certain point. So
I like how you say punish. And I know that's not it's not really a
it's not,
punishment,
yeah,
but
not
really it is.
sinister, but
No, but I think it's a really great point that, you know, people don't play games to lose. And it's funny because when I talk to like my in-laws about it, my mother-in-law always is like, "Did you win?" And I go, I played with friends and I always win." But it's not it's not a winning game, but sometimes it feels like you want to win and sometimes situations are not winnable. And just like in real life, consequences have actions, and you cannot always win an encounter. Sometimes that win looks like you running away and escaping to fight another day or getting stronger and going back to that situation later. And sometimes you do make the wrong choice and an innocent NPC gets killed or a city falls because you chose to go investigate something else instead of stand and fortify the city with the people who were there. Um, and I do have to say that I really appreciate those, I don't want to call them negative consequences, but we'll just call them consequences because that's what they are, right? It's not good or bad. It just is what happens as a result of the actions that we took or didn't take. And it makes it so much more real because I think even though it's fantasy, it would be really, really fantastical if everything always went right. You slipped and fell into a puddle of gold and now you're rich and you can do whatever you want. That's not that's not the way it happens. And for this kind of interactive role playing game, it's not like you can wah, 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 and then reset the game and start over again and try again and take a different avenue. It's different in that regard. So I really do appreciate what you do, and sometimes it sucks when you're going through it, but it makes it
Yeah.
makes it all that much more real. So I give you 2 thumbs up with it. Although in game I might give you thumbs down. From this side, I give you I give you thumbs up.
Yeah, but
Um,
it's nice to have that effect on the players because it shows that they're also immersing themselves within that world that we've created together, and they have value in it, and what happens. There's actual, not real stakes on it, but it feels like there's real stakes on what actions you
yeah,
take within these
for
games.
sure. I mean, especially for me, I get so involved. Um, I know that I know that I've absolutely been crying while I'm playing, and then other people will join me in crying because oh, you were so convincing. I wasn't convincing because I was acting. I was convincing because I was really crying
Invested,
and
yeah.
100% emotionally invested and impacted by what was happening. And
I'd like to
making
say that's not my goal, but often it is. Not to make you cry, but have an actual real life emotional reaction to what we are all contributing to, and
yeah.
that's where I like why I spend so much time on the immersion, which is why I make my own maps or have scenarios and do all this stuff behind the scenes, so you guys do feel like immersed in this world and these characters. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, I would be lying if I say it wasn't. I like my goal
If it
to
doesn't
make
make
you
you a
cry,
little happy
but
when I cry.
yeah, yeah.
It's becoming increasingly easier the older I get and the higher stakes I have in life in general with having kids and whatever. But I still really, you need to know, I really don't like crying. It's not it's not a thing that I enjoy. I get embarrassed. It makes it a little more bearable in game. And actually, like if I want to sit there and reflect to myself, being vulnerable and exposing myself in a game and allowing myself to process those emotions has probably honestly made me expressing them as a human being in the outside world a
Yeah,
little
to
easier.
deal with them in that third person context can absolutely help the first person
Yeah.
context in reality as well. It gives you a kind of a vessel to try it on
Mhm.
before you
Yeah.
accept it for reality.
I still when I try it out, I still don't like it, but I deal with it. So, because it's good for the story, I guess.
Yeah.
So besides people who, you know, cry, as a DM, what kind of player either do you look for when you're looking for, I guess, an enjoyable experience for you as a DM, right? Like you said, you want to see that all the work that you're putting in is having the impact that you want it to have on the players that you've joined around the table. So what kind of player do you look for, or what kind of player makes games enjoyable for you as the DM?
Well, it's a hard question because it's kind of like on a vibe kind of situation. Like I want to know the players want to be invested, if that makes sense,
Mm,
into their
yeah.
characters, and I don't particularly mind for one shots. They're usually kind of my let's have some fun, do whatever you want scenario, be silly. But my campaigns, I tend to prefer people who can be serious at the right moments and can be humorous at the right moments and knowing the differences between those situations for the gameplay. So it's people who can actually immerse themselves in the game as if it were reality, which I'm lucky enough I've found a group, which includes yourself, that can do that and can separate the humorous side to being a little bit more serious, because even some of the best fantasy films like Lord of the Rings have those moments between characters that are making inside jokes or playing about
Yep.
where it's not serious
Yep.
times, but when it gets serious, it can get serious. Um,
Serious. Yeah.
and the seeing players kind of slot themselves into their characters and role play is great as well, which you and Lee do superbly and have been doing superbly for every week when we play on the Monday games. And just to sit back and watch you guys have this interaction in the world that we created together, because you guys have that investment, is great as well. So I think it's kind of having players that have experience with me as a DM and the experience that I have running the game for yous gradually increases the more likelihoods I am to want players like you guys back again. So that's just my style of DM and suits your guys' style of playing. And I don't know whether that kind of twists each other in terms of I learn to accept situations because you guys have ran through it and I enjoyed it. Where it was anybody else doing that same situation, I may not have liked it as much in terms of the story progression, but it's how you dealt with the progression of the story that sort of made me invest my time and sort of campaign notes and the creation of things into you guys, because I'm giving you this stuff and you're actually using it to enjoy the experience. Where if I was making the stuff and it was ignored and the lore or the maps and stuff were just kind of second thought, it's more about I want to jump in there and kill some monsters and the map doesn't really matter and the lore doesn't matter, but I killed this monster, I'd be less likely to invest so much into the games. So having players that use what you invest in the games is probably the ideal player for me.
Yeah. I love that. I am, and I'm touched by it. And I think that yours absolutely at this point is the longest. We have chapters. I think of them as at
Yeah.
this point chapters in our campaign, and we play different roles in those chapters. But I think that it's been quite an amazing experience to be able to continue on from start and finish something and then continue on in the same world with a different set of characters, because we at this point are so familiar, I think, with each other and our play style that even when we bring something new and quirky to the table, we still kind of know how to have those interactions and move the story and process through different things. And it's been a really incredible experience, and one that I hope that regardless of the table that they find it at, the experience that I would wish on any player is to find a group that they gel with, that they can just continue to have fun with, right? It's almost like a marriage that you never stop dating through. It doesn't ever fall stale because you just keep dating and finding new ways to fall in love with your characters and your fellow players and the scenes in the world. It's
Yeah.
been a really great experience.
Yeah, and then keeping it fresh is partly why I've split it into what I've always planned to have three different chapters of this story. If we did the whole three chapters with the same characters, I think at some point it would become stale, which is why I like to move time on in chunks and see how those characters in the background would progress and then introduce some new characters. It just makes it feel fresh again.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably partly of the success of me also maintaining interest in this world, was that progression of time and the characters and allowing you guys to make new people within the world, and then seeing and using the older characters as
I love
either
that.
political
Yep.
influences or situational like activists and things like that within the
Yeah.
world.
Anybody who's listening to that is looking and trying to take away little tidbits and pieces from Jason as a DM. Another thing that I really love, so I get to experience my old characters in this campaign that I'm playing a new character in, but also the one shots that you run very often are also set in this world. And so characters that I've played with in like not just our core group of people, but in those one shots will sometimes show up back in the world. And it always brings a smile to my face, like, I know who that is, but I don't know who that is, but I know who that
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
And it's a really fun like Easter eggs that you find all around the world. That's been a really cool thing. So if you're listening as a DM looking for some fun things to do and add to your world, that's something that me, take it for what it's worth, has found really, really exciting. And I don't know, I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, I quite like running the one shots that influence the world. It's great for like NPC building for one and lore building, but it's fun to just to have you guys if you manage to join the one shots because often they're ran because we can't either do the usual campaign game or it's just on a day where you all can't make it. But having another set of people impact the main story is always pretty interesting because again it's the observation of direct cause and effect of if this party fail to do this task in this one shot, it can drastically or beneficially affect the party in the main campaign.
Yeah.
Which it just feels awesome for me to provide that, and also I get to DM for new and different people as well, and it's nice to just see how other people would play in that world and see how well they'd fit in there as well. Because
Hmm.
potentially we might need a guest character at some point, and having people who have played in these one shots, like Chet has done many a times, because he can't commit as often to the Monday game on a weekly basis. It's nice to have people like him know the world briefly enough to pass and still take part when he can in the main campaign as a particular character that benefits my kind of story driven aspect. But also is he knows the world enough that he's not making some random entry
Right,
to the
right.
world. He's already established and knows some lore that he can build the character around. So those introductions to the one shots help me kind of introduce other people to guest in the
Yeah,
games like that.
that's very true. So all of the things that you have run so far, I think this is a multifaceted question, so I'll break it up. What has been, and maybe I'll ask them both because it might even be the same answer, but what has been your proudest moment as a DM, and or what has been your favorite moment in any of the games that you've run so far? So maybe your favorite moment has to do with the players and your proudest moment as a DM is something specific to you, or maybe it's the same answer, but two separate, maybe, or similar questions for you.
Yeah, it's very hard questions though, because there's so many great moments to pull from, because it's a weird kind of aspect looking in at the game, and because the experience feels real when you do it, it feels like a memory, like we were there and we did this and we overcome this situation, and we know it's all imaginary and it's in our brains, but the feelings are like really invested there. So there's so many moments where it's been actually emotionally affecting me to watch you guys do something or something to happen, that they become my favorite because of how impactful they were to my day-to-day life within reality. And to name a few, there's each of you guys, Evelina, you and Lee. There's certain moments that I was looking in on it and just really proud of what you guys were doing at the time. So when Lee's character from the second campaign was confronting Lee's character from the first campaign about his abandonment, and the way that his character was dealing with that I was really proud of him making that connection, and really proud that he interacted with that correct connection, because it shows that he did have it, like that investment is kind of a confirmation of, oh, I'm doing a good job as a DM, but this guy's actually invested in these guys, in this character, in this story, and how it actually has affected his current character, which is amazing. Uh,
Yeah, that was a heavy thing to watch from the sidelines
yeah,
too.
and
It was incredible.
I feel like his character needed it, and in the moment, it felt like that. Like his character actually felt hurt from what Lee was saying and how he described what Fred was doing and reacted to what his first character was saying via me. Um, and situations where with Evelina in the first campaign with her mother and making hard choices, and seeing her progress as a character, but not in game, but also in real life, struggling with that moral dilemma and coming to a decision, made me super proud of her. And for yourself with your character in the first campaign was fantastic, but emotionally, I think Daisha may have been affected you more in over a longer period of time for decisions that you made, and going through them and running that character with that investment and still making decisions, even if as a player you know what the consequences might be, because sometimes it's expected from your point of view, but not the characters. And still making those decisions just made me super proud of you as well. So there's a lot of moments that I'm proud or would pick from. It's really hard to pin one moment down.
That's fair. The end of the last campaign, it broke me a little. I'm still I'm still dealing with it. I still think about it on a daily basis, and I know it hasn't been terribly long, but I still think about it on a daily basis, and I think that's why I've been dragging my feet a little bit with creating the new character, is that I know the decisions that I made for Daisha, and I know how big of an impact it was. I'm gonna take a deep breath so I don't get emotional again. But it it was it was really hard. It was really hard, and I know I expressed to you that personally some of the surrounding situations and elements made it very personal to me, Kristin, and dealing with that made it very cathartic to me as a person, because it felt very much so, because it aligned with certain events in my personal life. Um, it felt like a much heavier decision and consequence, than just a game. It was not just a game decision for me,
Yeah,
Kristin.
often I found it in games that it might be individual to me, but I will assume it's not, that most DMs go through it, that the games that we run can often reflect the reality on the outside, especially if
Mhm.
you know your players really well. Sometimes it sneaks in there subtly, and you just don't notice it until it's happening and look back on it and go, oh, maybe this was kind of subconsciously in there, and it is, which I hope we're at a point where you guys can just stop the game at any point and tell me that you're uncomfortable with
Yeah.
situations, because in real life can for sure affect how you run it, especially when it's a sandbox and it is constantly evolving. Either that's going to be politically, personally, or globally impacts how you move forward. So yeah, I get that it can be really hard decisions, but uh, I hope that yourself and the other players can always approach me about those situations as well.
Yeah.
If it does get
Yeah.
too personal or too heavy
For
on your
sure.
side.
I know that I can, and I can speak fairly confidently for, our group, that I think that any of us feels confident enough to talk to you about that. But I also, I mean, on a personal note, it was hard to push through. Sometimes it was hard to speak and get through, but also it was really, like I said, cathartic and therapeutic to be able to do that in a really safe space too. So, you know, flip side of
Yeah,
that is it was a nice, safe place with nice, trusted people around me to be able to deal with some of my personal baggage in a way that was slightly less personal, but still helped me function in my real life. But that's a whole different topic for a whole other podcast.
Yeah, as you can get real deep on that, so we should probably leave
Yeah.
that topic there for now and chat at a
So
later date.
pause on that. um, moving on to now, I know personally that you have killed a companion of mine. But have you ever killed one of your players? I mean, not or maybe intentionally, I don't know, but you don't have to admit to that. Have you ever had one of your players die in any of your campaigns?
I've nope, never had a player die. I killed Chet for a brief time during
Hmm.
the finale of the last campaign, and I thought that was him done, gone. Fortunately, I do provide you guys a reverse time cheese from the record. So he didn't stay dead for very long, but if you hadn't had that cheese, Chet would have been the first proper character death
Mm.
in one of my campaigns.
Except for how when I tried to sacrifice myself
You would
and
have been,
nobody wanted to
yeah,
let me
yeah.
get away with it. That wouldn't have been your doing.
That was not
That
my
was
choice. What was happening there was happening there. That was down to the other players
me
who
and my
intervened. Yeah.
sacrifice. um, so as we're wrapping up, be honest. Everyone knows that scheduling a group of people can be a really difficult thing. Um, as a DM, how frustrating is it for you when you have last minute cancellations? And I know that we don't have a ton of them. Um, and I think everybody is pretty well invested, but I know that this is not the only campaign you've ever run and you have one shots, but how frustrating is it? And when you do have those cancellations, what do you do to maybe offer as advice to other people? Do you run the session anyway with one person, two people? Do you cancel? Do you have a go-to series of one shots that you run in its place?
Yeah, the cancellations early enough, I can usually run one of the in-world one-shots to develop the story a little bit further. But if it's like a last-minute cancellation, I will often, if there's a way, remove the character from the situation and say they've gone to do this other thing which makes sense for their character. So it happens sometimes with Evelina had work or another player couldn't join. But fortunately, because of their backstories, which helps a lot in those situations, and they've gone to do this, which is reasonable for that character to go and do because it's in their backstory and it's who their character is. So it's not too bad. I don't mind the last minute cancellations. If it's a whole group cancellation and I've done all the work here, and I feel bummed, but life happens. You know what I mean? I take every time that happens with a pinch of salt. Of go,
Hmm.
it could be me next session that I'm getting called away to do
Sure.
something. So you have to look at it into like the humanity of it and just accept it for what it is and move on. It gives me a free time to then go maybe a little plan the next session over or do some other bits. So it's never really impacted me in any negative way.
Yeah, moreover, the question being less about being frustrated, but more about how to, I guess, pivot and turn around and do something else with that potential frustration, or just understanding that humanity is what it is and life is what it is. And sometimes unexpected things happen. And sometimes you have people who maybe scheduled something and forgot about it. And it's not even malicious, but how to pivot from there. And I think, like you even mentioned earlier, that sometimes you have those in world one shots that will affect the rest of the campaign, is a really good thing to have in your arsenal, which not everybody can do, but for you, it seems to work really well
Yeah,
too.
I mean, it derives mostly from you guys and the situations you put yourselves in. I go, well, if
Hmm.
they've gone over here, I had something planned over here, which is happening at the same time. It's again that world building. So who's doing that thing over here then? If
Yep.
they've gone this direction, because the situation is still there
Yeah.
and needs to be solved by somebody. So who is it who's there solving that situation? So it's mostly written by you guys of what happens in those immediate surroundings, and then I think about how that will impact you guys further down the line.
I think that's probably a really great benefit to running a homebrew campaign and having your own world for anybody who's maybe nervous about it. And world building and lore building as a whole, again, separate thing that we can talk about at a different date. But I think that you're right. You're sitting there going, well, as we talked about before, the world is continuing to function while you guys are over here. This is what would be happening over in here, like a cutaway scene, right?
Yeah.
This is what's happening over here in this town. What are you people now doing about that situation? That's really great. Um, so do you have, in closing, any advice for DMs just starting out, or maybe people who have given it a thought but are a little nervous to step behind the screen?
I'd say don't put too much pressure on yourself. The role, kind of the dungeon master, the title itself, or games master, holds a lot of weight. And probably because of the previous editions and how complex they were,
Sure.
you don't need all the rules and stuff. It can be purely situational and cause and effect based, and then if you need to make a decision, only then should you refer to the rules. So just get in, start role playing, because that's what the core of the game is. And if at some point somebody wants to throw a fist or do something, you don't even have to do core rule book. Just roll the dice, pick a number. If it's above that, it succeeds. If it's below that, it doesn't succeed. Um,
Yeah.
so don't let the rules hold you down. Just play the game that you want to play and enjoy the people and the experience with the people that decide to play it with you.
Yeah. And I think surrounding yourself with understanding people who know that maybe you're a first time game master, or maybe you're new to the game altogether and you took on the role as DM
Yeah,
just so your group could get together and play. We can all be wrong from time to time, and that's okay. It ultimately still is a
yeah. As
learning
as long as
experience,
you
whether.
are transparent with your players, I don't think
Hmm.
far much can go wrong at all. It's really hard to go wrong with DMing. Just be transparent of where you're at and your experience, and learn with the players because they may also be new to the game as well. And seeing DMs like Joe really develop over time,
Yeah.
his stuff, and he openly admits that there's certain rules and stuff that he doesn't know, and will have to refer to either others players or catchers after the game,
Yep.
and slowly just building up that experience and knowledge with the game system is probably the best way to go. The way that Joe's doing it, picked a module,
Hmm.
started running it with very little experience in the background, and now he's running games and making decisions like he's been doing it for years. So
Yep. I think Joe's a really great example because I think a lot of times there is that pressure to feel like, well, I'm on one side of the screen and you all are on the other side of the screen.
mm,
But at the end of the day, you're all sitting around the table as a team, and it is a, a team game,
cooperative
right? You're
storytelling game,
all
yeah.
exactly, you're all doing it together. So let the team help you the way that the players would help each other. You as the DM probably need to allow yourself that same kind of luxury where if you're struggling with remembering a rule or a mechanic or something like that, just, saying, "Hey, I can't remember. There are so many things in those stinking books to remember."
Yeah,
There's only so much capacity in your mind to remember all of that, plus all the other things that go on in your day to day. So I
yeah.
think that's a really great piece of
Think
advice.
rule of thumb. Just to decide on a ruling for whatever the situation is, and then look it up afterwards. And if
Yeah,
it can change from that point to be the actual rule, but in the moment, keep the story going. The story is the most beneficial part of the experience here, and how we keep that rolling. If you have to make up a rule on the fly, do it, and then look up the actual rule later.
yeah.
It's not too important. As long as the
It's
experience is
it's a game.
positive, then
Hmm.
it's all good.
Fantastic. Well, Jason, thank you so much for sitting down with me and giving me a look into how you go about things in particular, especially as one of your players. It's really nice to be able to prod you with these kinds of questions and get some insight into how you create the world for us and how you are even affected by what we do, the decisions that we make. I know that you in particular have been helpful and inspiring to me as a fledgling DM. I ask you questions. I tell you I take advice from you often. Not that I DM very often because I still get scared, but I also know that I'm not alone in my sentiment either. So from all of us who have had the pleasure of playing with you, thank you for all of your hard work you do to curate such wonderful worlds for us to interact in and explore around. And I really look forward to seeing what else you breathe life into for us. Thank you to everyone for joining us for another episode of the podcast. Until next time, stay cool. And if you can't stay cool, be wicked. See you next time. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you to Kev G. Moore for providing the music for this series. Check out his links for YouTube, Spotify and Patreon in the links below. Wherever you found us today, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content, and if you want to find out more about what we do, how to support us, pick up some merch and find links to our friends like JB Media, visit us at wickedcoolkids.co.uk.